So when you look at a modern map of Africa, your eyes are probably drawn to Nigeria almost immediately. It's massive.
Oh, yeah. You can't miss it. It's the most populous country on the whole continent, a huge economy, a cultural powerhouse.
And if you ask most people, okay, when did Nigeria actually start? You'll probably get the same answer. 1914.
Right. The amalgamation, that's the textbook date. It's when the British colonial administration took their northern and southern protectorates, basically drew a line around them, and said, okay, this is now one country.
But that date, 1914, is so, well, it's deceptively simple. It kind of suggests that before then there was just nothing, a blank space on the map.
Exactly. Or just chaos.
Yeah.
The old idea that African societies were just sort of sitting in a waiting room, for history to happen to them.
Yeah. And when we started digging into our source for today, A History of Nigeria by Toyin Falola and Matthew M. Heaton, that whole narrative just completely falls apart.
It really does. Because the story isn't about that one date. It's about a region that, for thousands of years, was this incredible laboratory for political experiments. We're talking empires, complex trade, even distinct forms of democracy.
And that's really our mission for this deep dive. We want to peel back that 1914 border and look at what was happening before. How the geography of the savannah created city-states, how religion built a massive caliphate, and how these incredibly diverse peoples governed themselves.
It's all about the mechanics of how these societies worked. And to understand any of that, you have to start with the stage itself, the geography.
Because the book makes it so clear, the landscape wasn't just background decoration.
No, it dictated everything. It's the place of huge contrasts. So imagine you're traveling from the coast northwards. You start in the south, in the Bight of Benin or Biafra. It's all coastal swamps, mangrove forests, super humid.
Right, and then you push inland and hit the dense rainforest.
Exactly. And that kind of terrain is really difficult to move through, which, naturally encourages smaller, more tight-knit communities. At least in the early days, it's hard to march a big army through a jungle.
Sure.
But as you keep going north, the trees start to thin out. You hit the savanna, the grasslands, and then eventually you get to the Sahel, which is that semi-desert region bordering the Sahara.
And cutting right through all of it are the two main rivers, the Niger and the Benue.
Yeah, the source calls them the arteries of the region. And that's not just a metaphor.
No, it's literal.
They were the superhighways. They allowed the cattle and grain from the open country in the north to be traded for, the yams and palm oil from the forest in the south. They connected these totally different worlds.
And that trade, that connection, is really the heartbeat of the whole story. But let's go way back. Because one of the first myths this book just dismantles is this idea of statelessness.
Yeah. The idea that before the famous empires, there was just anarchy, no organization.
Primitive tribes, that whole colonial era trope.
It's just a complete misunderstanding of what was going on. I mean, if you go to a place called Iwo Elaru in the southwest, archaeologists have found evidence of human life from 9000 BCE.
Wow.
That's the late Stone Age. But the real game changer, the thing that really messes with the standard timeline we learn in school, is the knuckle culture.
This is that amazing technological leap, right? I love this part.
It is. So in most of Europe and the Near East, you get this clear progression. Stone Age, then copper, then bronze, then iron. It's like a ladder. You climb one rung at a time.
Right.
The Nukka culture, around 600 BCE, they basically just jumped straight from the bottom to the top.
They skipped copper and bronze entirely.
They went straight from using stone tools to smelting iron. That is a massive, massive technological achievement. Iron gives you better weapons, sure, but the big deal is better farm tools, better hoes, better axes.
Which means more food. A food surplus.
Exactly. And a food surplus leads to population growth and specialization. You can't get those famous, intricate Nalk terracotta sculptures if every single person is busy farming just to survive. You need artisans.
So, okay, the technology is there, but what about the politics? This brings us back to that idea of stateless societies.
Yes, and Falola and Heaton argue this term shouldn't mean chaos. It actually describes a very sophisticated, decentralized form of democracy. And the best example of this are the Igbo people in the southeast.
This part just fascinates me because we're so used to history being a list of kings and queens. King so-and-so did this. The Igbo system basically said, we don't need a king. In fact, we'd rather not have one.
It was governance by committee,
Yeah.
but it was highly structured. You had these things called age grades. So everyone born within, say, a 3 to 5 year window, they formed a group for life. You moved up through society with your peers.
So your political power wasn't based on your family name, but on your generation, your age group. It sounds, in a weird way, very meritocratic.
It was. And big decisions were made in village assemblies, where the elders, the lineage heads, would debate until they reached a consensus. But there's a problem with any decentralized system, right?
How do you enforce the law?
Yeah. If there's no central police force, and I steal your goat and run to the next village over, who's going to stop me?
And that's where the secret societies come in, which
Yeah.
sounds very dramatic.
It does sound a bit spooky, but think of them as these cross-village organizations. Groups like the Eka Society. They were religious, they were judicial, they were social, all at once. And because they had members in Village A and Village B, they could enforce rulings across borders without needing a monarch.
It's like a grassroots federal system.
Well.
So while the Southeast is perfecting this decentralized power, the Southwest is going in the complete opposite direction.
Totally. They're building centralized urban kingdoms. We have to talk about the forest kingdoms.
Ife and Benin.
Two absolute giants.
Mm.
And they provide such a great contrast in how you can use power. Let's start with Ilife. So, in the Yoruba tradition, Ilife is the center of the universe. It's the place where the mythical founder, Oduriwa, came down from the heavens and created the world.
So its power isn't military, it's about legitimacy, it's soft power.
That's the perfect way to put it. Ife didn't have the biggest army, but the Uni, the ruler of Ife, was seen as the spiritual father of all other Yoruba kings. Other cities paid tribute not out of fear, but out of reverence. If you wanted your new king to be seen as legitimate, you had to respect Ife.
And the archaeology there just backs this up. We're not talking about a few mud huts. They had paved streets.
Paved streets
Mhm.
with crushed pottery, laid in these beautiful fishbone patterns. And the art, my God, the bronze and brass heads from the 11th and 12th centuries, they are so realistic, so technically perfect, that when the first Europeans saw them, they just refused to believe Africans could have made them.
Which is absurd.
Of course. They invented stories about a lost Greek colony or survivors from Atlantis. It just shows you how advanced the craftsmanship was. But then you look just to the east, to the Kingdom of Benin, and Benin has a very different feel.
If Ife is the Vatican, is been in Rome.
Maybe Sparta is a better fit, or
Yeah.
the Roman Empire in its most expansionist phase. Benin started out small, but under its king, the Oba, it became a military powerhouse, especially under Oba Iwer the Great in the 15th century.
What was it that Iwer did that was so different?
He restructured everything. He rebuilt Benin City into this marvel of urban planning with massive walls, but he also reorganized the government. He created this careful separation between town chiefs and palace chiefs.
Checks and balances.
Kind of, but it was all designed to centralize his own power, to make sure no single group could challenge him, and he expanded. Benin wasn't satisfied with just spiritual respect. They wanted territory. They conquered huge areas, and they controlled the economy through state-run guilds.
The guilds. That sounds so modern, like a nationalized industry.
It basically was. The Oba had a monopoly on the production of bronze, of ivory, of wood carving. All the artisans lived in their own specific quarters of the city. It was an industrial approach to creating luxury goods for trade and for projecting power.
Okay, so that's the forest. But if we follow those rivers north, out of the trees, we hit the savanna. And here the whole dynamic changes again. It's not about dense forests anymore. It's about open country and the Sahara Desert.
Right. Welcome to the world of the Hausa states and the Empire of Kanem-Borno. This is horse country, and horses mean cavalry.
Let's start with Kanem-Borno over by Lake Chad. The thing that just jumps out from the source about them is their longevity.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
The Saifawa dynasty ruled for 1,000 years. A millennium, that's longer than the Roman Republican Empire combined. And their power came from their position. They were the great hub for the trans-Saharan trade.
The gateway to North Africa and the Middle East.
Yep. And they were early adopters of new tech, too. You see this with the ruler Mai Idris Aloma in the 16th century.
This is the gunpowder revolution.
Exactly. While a lot of states were still using spears and arrows, Aloma was importing muskets. And this is the amazing part, Turkish military trainers
Wow.
from the Ottoman Empire. He was modernizing his army with the latest military tech from one of the world's great powers. It shows you how connected this region was.
And just west of them, you have the Hausa states, Kano, Katsina, Zaria. The source almost describes them like the old Greek city-states.
That's a really good comparison. They all shared a language, a culture, and a famous origin myth, the legend of Bayajida. But they were politically independent and super competitive with each other.
Can we just quickly tell the Bayajida legend? It's
Yeah.
great.
Sure. So the story goes that a prince from Baghdad, Bayajida, travels south and comes in the town of Dara. And there's this giant snake living in the main well, terrorizing everyone. Bayajida kills the snake, and as his reward, the queen of Dara marries him. And their sons go on to found the 7 original Hausa states.
It's a classic hero story, but it probably symbolizes something deeper, right?
Oh, for sure. It likely symbolizes the fusion of migrant traders from the north with the local population, creating this new dynamic culture. And these states thrived on that competition. Kano and Katsina were always rivals for control of the trade routes. They were like the great warehouses of the Sahel.
And this is where Islam becomes absolutely critical. It wasn't just a religion, was it? It was almost a business tool.
Absolutely. Think of Islam in this period as being like a trade passport. If you're a Hausa king and you convert, suddenly you share a legal and ethical framework with a merchant from Cairo. It just makes trade easier, it builds trust.
But the source makes a really important distinction here. For a long, long time, this was an elite religion.
Yes. The king might be praying towards Mecca to keep the trade caravans flowing, but the farmer out in the village is still making offerings to the local spirits to make sure the rains come.
And that tension, that gap between the pure Islam of the scholars and the mixed Islam of the rulers, that is going to cause a massive explosion later on.
It is. But before we get there, we have to talk about the huge shift that happens between 1500 and 1800. The world economy pivots. The Atlantic trade opens up.
Yeah.
And we have to talk about the slave trade.
Yeah. It's the darkest chapter. But the book is really good at explaining the specific mechanics of it in this region. First, it makes us define what slavery even meant locally before the huge European demand changed everything.
Right. It wasn't the same as the chattel slavery of the Americas.
So,
It was often what they call integrative. A slave in a household was still a person with some rights. They could own property, they could marry, and their children were often born free. There was also something called pawnship.
which is where you use a person as collateral for a debt.
Exactly. It's harsh, but it's a temporary economic arrangement, not a permanent loss of humanity. If I owe you money, my cousin comes to work for you until the debt is paid.
But the transatlantic trade it changed the math completely. It turned human beings into a pure export commodity, and that shifted the entire center of gravity from the Sahara down to the coast.
And this creates new powers. The Oyo Empire becomes the dominant force. And Oyo's fascinating because it's perfectly positioned. It's in the savannah, so it has cavalry, but it's close enough to the forest to control the trade routes down to the port cities.
A middleman empire.
That's it. It controlled the flow. But politically, Oyo is the one I really want you to focus on. They had a system of checks and balances that is just. It's astounding.
The Oyomesi.
The Council of Chiefs. The Alifin, the king, was powerful, but he was not an absolute monarch. If the Alifin became a tyrant or just incompetent, the Oyomesi would meet, and they would present him with a symbolic gift,
An empty calabash.
sometimes with parrot's eggs inside. And that was a very polite, very quiet way of saying,
Your time is up.
the gods reject you, the people reject you, the earth rejects you. And the Alifin was then constitutionally required to commit suicide.
That is an incredibly high-stakes impeachment process.
It's brutal, but it worked. It
Mhm.
ensured no single person was bigger than the state. It prevented dictatorship for centuries.
So Oyo is running the interior. But down on the coast, especially in the Bight of Biafra in the southeast, the system was completely different. There's no big empire. Instead, you have the Arrow.
The Arrow are one of the most brilliant and, frankly, manipulative organizations in this whole history. They were a subgroup of the Igbo people. And they used a religious oracle, the Arrow Chukwu oracle, or Long Juju, to completely dominate trade.
How did that even work?
Well, the Arrow were traders who could travel everywhere because they were seen as being protected by the gods. So if two villages had a dispute over land or something, they would hire the Arrow to go and consult the oracle. The oracle would issue a verdict, and usually the guilty party would be ordered to pay a fine.
And the fine was people.
The fine was people. The gods demand 10 of your young men as payment, and those people were then quietly funneled down a network of rivers and sold to European ships. The Arrow acted as the supreme court of the region, but they were actually running a massive slave trading syndicate.
Wow, it's a monopoly maintained by spiritual warfare.
Exactly. And then in the Niger Delta itself, you get the canoe houses, which really did function like modern corporations.
A trading firm with a fleet of war canoes.
And here's the crazy thing. They were totally meritocratic. You could start your life as a slave, paddling one of those canoes. But if you were smart, if you had a real head for business, you could rise up through the ranks. You could become the head of the entire house.
So even in this period of brutal exploitation, you have this one strange pocket where social mobility is based on pure, raw capitalism.
A brutal capitalism, yes, but mobility nonetheless.
So we have this incredibly complex shifting network, but then the 19th century arrives, and the book argues this is when everything changes, not because the British show up in force, not yet, but because of massive internal revolutions.
The 19th century in this region is just a century of upheaval, and in the north, it starts with the jihad.
1804, Usman Den Fodio.
Yes. And he's often painted as just a warlord, but he was an intellectual first, a Fulani scholar who looked at the Hausa kings and saw corruption. They were taxing people into poverty, they were seizing property, and they were practicing that mixed Islam we talked about earlier.
So he was a reformer. He wanted a return to social justice and religious purity.
He was a revolutionary. And he rallied the Fulani herdsmen and the fed-up Hausa peasants. And against all the odds, they overthrew the ancient Hausa dynasties. They created the Sokoto Caliphate.
Which wasn't just a change of rulers, it was a unification.
It created the single largest empire in West Africa. One administration stretching from the desert almost down to the forest. It brought a revolution in literacy and law. It was a completely indigenous renaissance.
But at the exact same time, the North is unifying, the South, specifically the Oyo Empire, is completely falling apart.
It's just a tragic collapse. The whole empire implodes. And the trigger was a betrayal. The Elephant's top general, a man named Afanja in the city of Ilorin, decided to rebel. And he made a fatal mistake.
He asked for outside help.
He invited his new powerful neighbors from the north, the Fulani warriors of the Caliphate, to come and help him.
The Trojan horse.
And it backfired spectacularly. His allies took over Ilorin, they killed Afanja, and they declared Ilorin an emirate of the Sokoto Caliphate. Oyo lost its whole northern territory, the center could not hold, and the empire just fractured into decades of civil war.
And this brings us right to that final provocative thought the book leaves you with. When the British finally start their big push inland in the late 19th century, they aren't walking into some ancient, static world that's been the same for 1,000 years.
Not at all. They are walking into a region that is in the middle of its own revolutions. The Sokoto Caliphate is still consolidating its power. The Yoruba states are in the thick of a civil war, trying to build a new order from the ashes of Oyo. The whole place was in flux.
It just makes you wonder. That great what if the colonial interruption hadn't happened at that exact moment, how would these internal changes have played out?
Right. Would Sokoto have pushed all the way to the sea? Would a new, stronger Yoruba confederacy have risen from the chaos? We'll never know. The entire trajectory was intercepted.
But the DNA is still there. The distinct identities, the emirates in the north, the Oba in the southwest, that democratic commercial spirit in the southeast, those weren't invented in 1914. They were forged over these thousands of years of history.
Exactly. The lines on the map are recent. The roots of the country are ancient.
And that's our deep dive. Thanks for listening.
See you next time.